On this. Okay, we are recording. So let us begin. So my first slide is a quote from Dorothea Lange. She was a very famous photographer in the 40s. Doing Dust Bowl photography was one thing she's famous for, but she said something interesting. She said, a camera is a device that teaches you to see without a camera. And my interpretation of what she meant by that was that you'll take a picture and you'll look at it and go, oh, that's not good. And then you'll take it from a different angle, or you'll take it in a different way, and you go, oh, that's getting better. And then finally you'll take the shot that you think you saw from the beginning. And all of that, the camera is teaching you how to take a photograph and look at it, look at the scene, and then move on from there. So I always thought that was an interesting quote. I'm trying to get to the next slide, and it's not cooperating. Oh, okay. So the 4 Ps that we're going to be talking about today are planning, perspective, persistence, and then pushing the shutter. And planning is really all about training the eye. And I'm going to go through some basic principles of how to train the eye. And the first thing is being curious. I'm a very curious person, and I'm always looking at something and wondering if I can photograph that, or if it strikes me as something interesting to photograph. And ideas are everywhere. They're in grandkids, they're in your backyard, they're in places you go and travel, they're everywhere. And there's a guy named Ken Lee, and he puts on seminars on the art of seeing, actually, and he puts on, you can sign up with him, and he takes trips with photographers. But his quote is, seeing is a skill and creativity is a muscle. And diving deeper into that, yes, seeing is a skill, which means that you can develop it. It's a skill that anyone can develop. And the creativity side of it as a muscle is you've got to practice it, you've got to train it, you've got to work with it. So that's my interpretation of how Ken approaches it. And he's online, you can look him up under Ken Lee, and he's got some good material out there. And I've never worked with him, so I have no idea other than what I've seen online of him. And then the last thing is you're really training your eye through research and baseball. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll tell you what I mean by that. Planning and researching during baseball. So if you watch baseball, which many of you do not, but baseball is a slow game, and there's always time to do something else while you're watching the game. So I typically will have my iPad in my lap, and I will look at things that I'm interested in, and photographs that I'm interested in, or situations that I would like to think about being in the future to shoot a photograph. So a great place to just sit and mull through images is Google Images. And you can see at the top here, I typed in creative photography. And this is what I got. I got a multitude of images that all are fairly creative in their direction. And I like this one that's the forks doing the Sistine Chapel Hand of God type of image. And I've often thought, I have some forks in my drawer that I don't like. I could bend those up. So those are things that just kind of spur ideas. And there's several black and white photographs below those 2 forks, which are other ways to use the shape of a fork and spoons and other utensils. But really the key with these are that it gives you ideas, but the big thing is that if you click on one of these, many times, not always, but many times, it'll take you to a site that explains how the picture was made and tells you, oh yeah, what we did here was we used a water balloon and we took the picture just as it exploded over here, this one in the center, and So you see a little bit of the red balloon down here at the bottom, and then you Photoshop some sunglasses, and I'm not going to shoot that particular photograph, but it will teach you how these were made. And it's always good to learn more of those things because you'll use it in the future. Something else I use is Flickr. And many of you probably participate in Flickr. You have images up there. And it teaches you something. In this case, I typed in nature photography. And it teaches me that, in particular, these two birds, that you're really getting the photograph at a key point. Because in nature, you want to be able to tell a story that this bird was fishing, and guess what? It caught a fish. And in this case, it caught a fish, but it also looks like it had been diving and is coming up out of the water and spreading water below. We'll move on to the next one because I spend time on Flickr, but I also spend time on Behance.net. If you don't know about Behance, it's a Adobe site, and lots of artists put their work there. So it's more artistic, and it's more graphic in a lot of the images that you have, and it has a wide spectrum of people, and you can spend a lot of time flipping through that. And in this, all I did was type photography, and it gave me this wide spectrum of images. And then the last place is Pinterest. And in this case, I typed in black and white photography, and it's got a whole series of interesting black and white photographs. And one that struck me in particular, that I just did this a few days ago, is this second one in. You see this guy, this kid leaping from one roof to another roof. And we recently had, maybe 3 months ago, one club member submitted an image similar to this, not the same at all, not the same location or anything, but it struck me that that photographer may have been inspired by this photograph. And look for things that inspire you, that interest you. And by the way, stop me at any time and ask questions, and we can discuss things as we go. So I don't mind that at all. So after I've spent all this time looking through images, as I'm on those sites, I'll right-click the image that I like, and I'll save it. And I have a file called CoolPix, and these subfolders are in the CoolPix folder. And I do things like creative and nature and people and places and food and low-key, high-key images. This is something that I'm going to spend some time doing. So you might see some of these from me in the near future. Anyway, the key is that you expose yourself to these ideas, these images, and then save them, and then go back to them, add on to these folders, and you'd be surprised at how quickly you accumulate images, especially if you're a baseball fan that spends their time looking at their iPad half the time. So, but it's a great place to get ideas. So the second P is perspective. So we did a little planning, we came up with some ideas, and perspective really are elements, looking for elements in photography. Strong colors stand out in photography, and I have a slide on this in a little bit. Leading lines, of course, you've heard that talked about before. Interesting shapes, space. If you look at this, when I first look at this, I see a goblet, but when I flip my eyes or I look at it again, I can see two faces staring at each other. So white space, which you may have heard about, is just the same as allowing for space in an image. For example, we've had several photographers that have won with having a single figure, a small person perhaps, and a giant sand dune in front of them. and they're not in the middle, they're on one side, and they're walking up the dune, or they're walking across the dune. And it's allowed for a tremendous amount of space in the image, and those are successful images. Texture means a lot. If you have textures that can work with whatever images that you are focusing on. Let's say you're focusing on a green leaf, and around it, there's all these brown leaves that are dead and shredded and bent and textured. And those two things set each other off, and that's a good way to look at things. Repeated images, and we'll show you some examples in the near future here. Thinking about things in monochrome instead of color, or when you're looking at an image, go, you know, it's okay in color, but that might really be strong in monochrome. So it's seeing the monochrome before you make the monochrome, and then bringing it back to the computer and seeing if you're right. And then the last thing on looking for elements is emotion, that people can create emotion, animals can create emotions. You can add emotions to certain images, whether it's there or not, if there are things that affect you in that way. And excuse me. And let's move to the next one. This is talking about leading lines as an example. It also has repeats in it, also has shapes in it. And this image, this is not my image, this is just an image, but you can see the leading lines in red here. You can see the repeated steps and the repeated verticals here. And then all the different shapes are going on. The umbrella creates a very interesting shape that contrasts with the very rectangular shape of the steps and whatever these vertical columns are. And you even have texture here in the street with these pavers. So there's a lot of things going on here, but they all work together. So your perspective in looking at it and the perspective of the camera looking for the leading lines makes a difference. You also need to look for structure in a photograph. Many times you want to have balance, and things that are in perfect balance often work. But guess what? You might want to have an emphasis similar to what I was talking about, the person walking on the sand dune. And that person is very small, and they're over to the right-hand side of the photograph, and the rest of it is all dunes or clouds or something else. So the emphasis becomes that person. It could also be a color that creates the emphasis. Looking for movement, and I've got an example that shows movement as well. Proportions, and to proportions, looking at these triangles, if you were in Giza and looking at the Great Pyramids, if you were standing close to one, it may make the other two look very tiny. And by the way, I don't know if they may be different sizes, but you can create proportion to create interest in your photographs. A rhythm, in this case, these are repeating rectangles. However, they're getting smaller as well. They're going back, they're creating some depth. So it creates a rhythm in the photograph. And the last thing is unity. And you look at this initially and you may say, where's the unity? The unity is not only are these triangles, all 6 of these triangles are united together, but there's also a white triangle it's sitting in, and it's also adjacent to a blue giant triangle. So unity makes a big difference in how you look at photographs. So looking for proportions, we've got this giant man in the foreground, we have this tiny guy in the background, but we've also got movement. And this creates really interesting images. And the only thing I would have done slightly differently here is this little guy has plenty of space to walk in the direction he's walking. this big guy is running out, he's running into the edge of the photograph. And it might be nice to have another inch of photograph on this side. So another thing perspectively is to look for complementary or opposite colors. And if you're not familiar with the color wheel, it would be nice to become familiar with it. And the color wheel basically looks at opposite colors. And Gary Marcos actually wrote an article about a year ago in the newsletter, and it talked about not only complementary colors, but adjacent colors and how to work colors. So you might look for that if you want to look a little deeper into that. And if I can find it, I will include it in the email that I'll send with this presentation and the recording, with a link for the recording tomorrow. So keep in mind that how the color wheel works is, if you look at these oranges, I want to point out specific colors. This orange color here, the opposite is this blue, and the lighter colors have opposites as well. This very light orange has a very light blue violet kind of here. And the reds, I'm pointing out these two colors in particular because they're going to show you an example. The reds, very deep red here, corresponds to a deep blue here, or bright blue, I should say. And so for my example, if you remember these two, we'll go here. So here's our orange, and it was shot. I didn't shoot these. These are things I took off the internet, but you've got this blue violet in the background, and it's the opposite color, and it makes these oranges jump off in the photograph. Same thing's true. These tomatoes, the little deeper, darker red than the one in the color wheel, but correspondingly, the blue that they used is also a little deeper, slightly darker blue than what's on the color wheel. But it gives you the idea of how these colors contrast and how it makes a difference in your photographs. And all of this is aimed towards trying to make better photographs, but also in the competitions, it's important to keep as many of these things in mind as you can, because judges are looking for these things. Another thing about perspective is change your tripod height. Most of us are going to do this if you're using a tripod, that is. And I recommend that you use it as often as possible. It eliminates camera shake, it eliminates problems with wind most of the time. A lot of things it does. So in this case, this person has their camera set at eye level so that it's comfortable for them. A couple of bad things about this: if you look at this tripod, this center rail is so tall that it's going to be a little less stable. I would get a tripod that was taller, because this looks like it's extended in its full length in that case, instead of having to extend this rail. So you could bring the tripod down like this, much more stable, and gives you a different viewpoint. And I'll talk about viewpoints in a second. And you're also, most tripods out there these days, you might have to pay a little bit more for one that will go in this very low position. And mine actually goes completely flat. But $150, $200, and you can get a really nice tripod that can do all these things. But it's important to change your height when you're thinking about photographs, because that changes your perspective and causes you to see things differently. And here's some examples. Here's an extremely low shot over here, the trees, and it picks up a bit of the foreground, and you can tell it's right on the ground. It might be on a tripod, it might be sitting on the ground, but it's very low. And the opposite of that is a high perspective. And this shot allows, especially with a little child, that's something you can do, is to shoot directly down on a small child like that. Usually, in the case of children, you want to be as the one on the far right. This is shot directly at eye level. A, it makes the child a little more comfortable, but B, it makes the image a little stronger instead of shooting down on a child. And then in this case is trying to do something different with an angle. Why not shoot something that the reflection is actually the photograph here, because you can see all of her face. This, you only see about 60% of her face, if that. And now you can see all of her face in the reflection. And it makes a very nice composition. So. And persistence in photography. And why is persistence important? Well, for me, I start with a sketch, or sometimes I will start with an image. I'll put it into Photoshop and I'll move things around. I'll change things. I'll try to make it my own. I'll add things to it to see if that enhances it. And then try to figure out if there's a place that actually I can go actually shoot this. And I print out the concept and I carry it around with me, and I show other people and ask them what they think of this, perspective image that I'm going to shoot. And in the case when there's a model in the image, I often have to ask multiple people to model, because I'll show them the image that I've put together, and some people are not comfortable with whatever that image is. Other people don't want to do it for one reason or another. But anyway, I usually have to ask 2 or 3 people before I find someone that will accept. And I'll show you some examples of that too. And then, of course, wait for the right light, because light is everything. And in the case of this image down here, this is a Greek myth. And Larry's done a lot of photographs using Greek myths as a starting point. Craig Colvin, in about maybe 2 months ago, had an image of a woman pushing a tumbleweed up a rock angle. And this is a Greek myth, and this is Sisyphus. And he was destined to, he went to hell, and which is not a good start. And then he was destined to push a rock up a hill using all the strength that he had, until he was so weak at the very top, he was able to stop it. However, his curse was that it would roll over him and all the way back to the bottom of the hill. And the very next day, he had to start over and push it up again. So many of you probably know that story, but it bears repeating. So now we're talking about pushing the shutter. So there are few totally new concepts, and you can't own a concept. If you say, I have the most unique thing in the world, I'm going to do 3 round pegs and 2 square pegs, and I'm going to put a feather on the top. Okay, that's something that you can set up as a concept. But the only thing you own is actually the click of that shutter. You own the copyright to that photograph, but you don't own the concept of the square pegs and the round pegs and the feather. That's out there in the atmosphere. So one way to train is to find a photograph that you really like online and copy it and figure out a way to improve it, make it better. You will learn a tremendous amount from it. I have done that many times, and I've learned a tremendous amount doing it, and it's a great way to train. And get inspired and evolve concepts you see. You're looking at something, let's go back to that feather and the pegs. If that's what you saw and you decide you set up and shoot it that way, well, let's evolve that. How can you evolve that? Maybe you evolve it from just feathers to a bird, and the bird is now pecking at birdseed that's on one of the cylinders, the round pegs. And perhaps at that point, you have it doing math. It could do one peg, two pegs, three pegs, it could count, or there are all kinds of things you could evolve it to at some point. And then the last point is trying something new if you can. Doing something brand new is extremely difficult. Photography has been around for 175 years. A lot of things have been done. And occasionally someone will come up with something that's pretty different. Is it evolved from another concept? Maybe, probably. But if you can come up with something new, then I applaud you. So now I'm going to show you some examples of work that I've done and how I was inspired and what led me to taking the photograph. So the very first photograph is just a person that has the clay mud mask on their face. And when my youngest daughter was about 7 or 8, she and her friend put clay masks on, and my wife fixed them all up with it. And of course, immediately they ran outside to play, and they forgot about that they had the masks on until they started to crack and peel off. And they came running back in the house, screaming in hilarity. They were laughing their butts off because they saw their faces cracking. And I remembered that scene in my head. And one day I did a search and I did clay. And I did clay mask was the search. And this woman popped up and I thought, wow, I'd like to shoot something like that. So I took that and I asked 3 different women if I could take their picture like this. And they all said no. So they didn't want their picture taken that way. And I was showing it to this guy on the right. And I was saying, do you know a woman that, would be comfortable shooting like this? And he goes, heck, I'll do it. And he happens to have kind of medium dark skin and very green eyes. And I said, yeah, you turn out just fine. So I painted him with clay and we let it dry, put a blow dryer on it, and I submitted that photograph to a competition and won first place that night in monochrome. And that's how that came to be. This is another one that I submitted and for a competition. And I had this in my library. I had this tree with the cloud on top of it. And I thought, that's pretty interesting. That's pretty creative. I like that idea. And one day I stepped outside of my house and all of these puffy clouds were in the sky. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I'm going to take a picture just for reference to keep those clouds. And then when I looked back at this tree photograph, and I happened to notice that the little girl next door was walking outside, and I said to her, I actually said to her parents, I said, you know what, you'd be great in a little photograph that I have in mind. And they agreed. And this cloud that she's putting her hand on is actually a separate cloud that I had. And I have a whole folder full of clouds that I use as different backgrounds. And so this little cloud was in that folder. And so I photoshopped that in. I photoshopped her as a separate image from the clouds on top. And then I photoshopped clouds inside of the basket. And she was just standing there with a basket over her arm. And I asked her to reach up like she was going to grab something in the sky. And she did all those things. And this was a successful image that also won in a competition. So this is an image that I took recently. It was an honorable mention in a competition, our last competition actually. And I had remembered this from a circus that I went to when I was a little kid. I remember a woman was balancing on the back of a horse. And I always thought that was really cool. that she could do that. And I started thinking about making a photograph like that, but A, I don't know where any horses are that I could get a hold of, and B, I don't know any ballerinas. And so anyway, I went back to the little girl next door and her parents and said, you know, I have this idea. How would you like to be standing on top of a horse? And she goes, well, how about an elephant? And I went, okay, it's an elephant. So I took her photograph in my front yard. I went to the Oakland Zoo and I photographed 3 elephants because elephants don't tend to want to model for you and hold still in the position that you want them to. And then I had some clouds in my file and other things. So I'm going to show you how I took this apart. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I'm going to switch to Photoshop and I'll show you how this one came about. Whoops. Okay, I'm back and I'm sharing my screen again. So this is my Photoshop file for this image. And what I had done was I took these clouds that I had in a shot. This is a separate shot of dry grassy hills near my house, and I merged them together. And you can see a little flaw here in the cloud image and a little dark area here. But guess what? Those are going to be covered up by an elephant that I happen to know. So I went to Lexington Reservoir and I shot this shot of the water. And this is on the low side of Lexington Reservoir, which is to the right as you're going towards Santa Cruz. And all these reeds were growing up there. And then I went to the Oakland Zoo. And as I told you, I had to shoot 3 different elephants because one didn't really cooperate. So this one had an interesting tail that worked. The other one, I couldn't see all of the tail. This one had a nice textured body. So the body and the tail are working together. And then I got to move my screen a little bit. And that's the elephant that I liked because the trunk was whipped up on his head. And my concept was for the little girl to be reaching towards the elephant's trunk. And lo and behold, we put the little girl in there. And that's what she's doing. And then in order to make it feel a little more real, I did several other things. I did, first of all, if you look at the girl, I'm going to put a shadow down below her on the elephant's back. I'll turn that on so you can see the shadow of her leg, and her shadow is across this part. And that just helps for a reality check to make it look more real. And then I did a shadow underneath the elephant and where the tusk is and the trunk so that there's a shadow there. And these are all layers in Photoshop. And then a final shadow that's underneath the elephant itself. And for those of you that will be submitting images to the virtual exhibit, those are all due by the end of the month, by the way, by the end of August. And you need to have your name in there. So down at the bottom here, I have my signature that I dropped in. So I'm going to open it up to questions for a minute, and then I'll show you the final 2 slides after that, if anyone has any questions or wants to talk about different things about seeing.
Yeah, Eric, this is Gary.
Hi, Gary.
Hey, I'll send you a copy of the article. I just happened to be dropping in. How do you bring together? I mean, I understand assigning yourself a project, which you're essentially doing.
Yep.
How does that project fit into your broader artistic vision? Are you working on like just improving technical skills to be able to do these things that you're sharing with us? Or are you building, do you have some larger project or statement that you want to make with this, the aggregation of work that you're doing?
Yeah, for me, it's really building skills, and I haven't set myself the goal, although that's somewhere in the future, of aggregating my work into some continuous flow of work. And it sells better that way if that's something I want to do in the future. It also shows how I progress over time. And to me, it really comes down to, can I do this? And I challenge myself every time. You know, this one, I said to myself, I think I can do this. So I went, took all the different photographs and started building it. And as I built it, I went, yeah, I can do this. And I think that that's what a lot of people can do as well. I have an advantage. I was a graphic designer for many years, and I still am. I work full time doing that right now. So Photoshop comes fairly easily to me, and that helps tremendously. But getting the concept is really the tough part. And working this backwards from the woman that's standing on the back of a horse, it all came together in this image. And I shot actually other things. Originally I was going to have the elephant walking in kind of a desert scene, and I have a bunch of images from Death Valley, but it didn't work as well. So I took all those out and I went up to Lexington and I shot some water, thinking that an elephant would be at the edge of a pond. That makes perfect sense. I've seen it. National Geographic has done that a million times, so I can do that too.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, let me show you the last few slides here. And I'm going to stop sharing and I'll share again. So that's the final image that I was just talking about. And then PowerPoint presentation that I will send out tomorrow. Oops. Oh. Can you still see me?
We can see your slides screen.
Okay. I'm getting a message that Zoom quit unexpectedly.
Sorry, stop.
Eric, you're muted.
Let's try that again with voice. Anyway, this is a book called The Photographer's Eye. I don't know if you can see it or my.
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah, take my word for it. And it's a book by Michael Freeman. It's a very interesting book, especially if you're newer to photography. It'll guide you through a lot of different things, and the art of seeing is in there. I advise everyone to research, as I do, on Flickr and Google and Pinterest and Behance, and help you to develop ideas. The Toledo Museum, this is a link that's in the PowerPoint, and that will take you to a section that they have on the art of seeing. And that's where I got the little diagrams that had the elements of a photograph, the color, the monochrome, the various elements. And it's a good article. And then there's another book called The Art of Seeing by Freeman Patterson. And then the last thing is a very lengthy article in Petapixel, which is a favorite place that I like to go to look at images that they have and new equipment, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a nice article there on the art of seeing as a photographer. And I will add Gary's article to that as well. And because it's a nice article on color. And I have used elements of that article myself a few times. And then the last is a quote by my favorite guy, Ansel Adams, who says, with all art expression, when something is seen, it is a vivid experience, sudden, compelling, and inevitable. And that's how I feel about many of the pieces that I've done. The work with the elephant, as soon as I saw it in my mind coming together, then I got excited about it. It was vivid to me, it was compelling, and I knew that it would be a strong image. And I just started developing it, and it worked. And that's my show. Any other questions?
Thanks. This was really great, Eric. I have a lot of ideas and thank you for sharing them.
Thanks, Bunny. Appreciate it.
I agree. It was terrific. Very succinct too.
Yeah, I had it longer, and I tested it on a couple of people.
It's a good thing to do.
So I took out about 6 slides, and I'd still covered all the same material, but I think it actually will work pretty well. And if people follow some of the basic things, and you probably already do, Susan, you have a good mind for seeing these things. So
But you know, the funny thing, you just have to keep doing things like this, because, you know, as many as you do, there's stuff you take away the first time. Like today, I just looked at another, something that Charlotte Gibb did, and she was talking about composition and how contrast can help, you know, create the kind of composition that you saw, you know, that you wanted to present.
Right.
And she gave her, you know, a great, what do you call it, tool to do that. And, you know I heard her presentation before. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah.
You know, so I appreciate, you know, the fact that you've consolidated so many great ideas into one place.
And the other thing is, I think that you might get me to watch a baseball game.
Yeah.
Because now I know what to do. Now I know what to do during those boring games.
Well,
I was thinking maybe I need to figure out something boring on TV to watch to
That's
do
right.
that with.
yeah. Oh, I love baseball, and if there's an important play, there's going to be a lot of noise, so I can stop and go look and watch the play. So
They repeat it several times over.
Yeah. Yeah. And thanks for sending the slides out. That'll be really great for us to be able to
yeah, I'll
follow
send
up
the
on.
slides and the recording.
Yeah.
I don't know if I need to send the recording necessarily, maybe just the slides, huh?
And no, what we've done before is I think Jim Katzman can help you to post it on our YouTube site. And then you give me the link and I'll put it up on the workshops page.
Okay, all right.
And so people who haven't been to the workshop might run into it as well and might want to see it later.
Okay.
Hey,
Sounds-
Eric, I think good presentation. And I think that the picture you chose, you know, the eye with the zipper is a good one. because it really is sort of inward looking when it comes to the art of seeing. You know, it's what you as the maker want to see, need to see, express something about the seeing, and then having the tools to do that. I think I'm sort of like you, to put you on the spot here, in that I tend to experiment a lot with different techniques.
Mhm.
But the thing I wrestle with, at least now, is kind of the body of work. It's like, okay, you know, I can do slow motion photography, or I can, you know, capture a bicycle race, or I can do all of these different things, both in the camera as well as in Photoshop. But it feels to me personally, my stuff, somewhat piecemeal, you know, and so one of the interesting experiments that I've done is I've gone back into Lightroom, which is where all my photos are, and I've looked for photos, what I would consider my top photos. And it's interesting to go back and review one's own photos to see what common threads there are. So for me, minimalism is something that stands out. But yeah, it's one of the things I think for me personally, again, I think is really great techniques. And the techniques are, I guess, the way I'm positively looking at it, is they're building blocks to moving so that when you have something you want to say as like a body of work, you have the tools to bring that forwards.
Right. Yeah, you have a complete skill set there, and that can apply to so many different things. And that's kind of my problem, is that I'm an extremely curious person, and it's just like sports growing up. I wanted to do everything. You know, I wanted to do volleyball, I wanted to do basketball, I wanted to do baseball, football. I did them all, but guess what? I didn't do any of them in a great way. So it's the same thing with photography. I tend not to do much in the nature category. None of us have been traveling much, and maybe that'll change. So maybe I'll start taking some more photographs there. But I think as a final body of work, you're absolutely right. At some point, I need to get all of this meshed into, this is who this guy is as a photographer. So someday.
I'm laughing because I got the same problem. And sometimes you just have to put it in categories, you know.
Yeah.
Hey, these are my wildlife images. These are my creative images, you know. And they're just, you know, I don't know. I've been looking at that for a long time.
Yeah.
Brooks Jensen has a really good presentation on that, and he says just get your photographs out. You know, just print small ones and throw them out on the floor and put them together and see what happens.
Yep. Well, I think Gary had a good point of going back and looking at all your best photographs in one folder. And if you did that, maybe there'd be a common thread. I might have to do that. I think my common thread is going to be Photoshop right now, which is a very big common thread.
Well, thanks. It was really terrific, Eric.
Well, you're welcome. And I hope everybody got something out of it. And we will.
Thanks, Eric. It's good.
Thank you.
That was really
It's
good.
great.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Take care.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you very much.
Good night.
Good night.